Hello everyone, so I'm going to continue from where I left off in the last video, talking about Charles Darwin and this other scientist, Alfred Wallace. So both of them were working on the same idea at the same time, the same hypotheses on natural selection. Both of them had voyaged around the world, they had traveled a lot, and during their travels had collected a lot of supporting evidence, and they both actually presented at the same time in London. Oftentimes, Charles Darwin gets a lot of the credit because he was the first one to publish his work. However, Wallace also still deserves credit because he was also working on the same idea at the same time, and the two eventually did collaborate with each other. Now, Darwin went on a voyage on a ship called the HMS Beagle, and he was, as I think I said earlier, a naturalist, meaning that he studied nature, all the different plants and animals, and he also collected many of those plants and animals on his journey. He also coined the term descent with modification. He did coin the term evolution, but he only says it maybe one time. He doesn't like to use one word to describe what it was that he was observing. So oftentimes he would say descent with modification, meaning that things are changing over time. He proposed that all species descended from pre-existing species. So they had ancestors and they changed over time. And he was the first to argue that all life came from a few original kinds of life. So we were previously talking about those first cells, which would have been the original kinds of life. This image that was in the beginning of your notes is one of the most famous images associated with him. These were his original notes, and he shows this branching tree, which when we get to cladograms and phylogenies later on, I'll talk about them more. This is essentially showing how we start with a common ancestor and we get branching into different species through the process of natural selection, and again, which is evolution because the species are changing over time. Now, a little bit more about his journey. So one of the most notable things is that he visited the Galapagos Islands. This is near the equator. It's off the coast of South America, and it's a chain of islands. He noticed a lot of differences between species on each island. So for instance, one thing that he studied in particular was these finches, which is a type of bird. And he noticed that they were all the same, like they're all finches, they're all still the same species, but a lot of them varied in their beak size and shape, depending on where in the environment they were living and thriving in. The beak size and shape related directly to what type of food that particular bird was consuming. He also studied tortoises, and they varied in their shape of their shell, the length of their neck, again, depending on what type of environment they were in and what island they were on. Eventually, Darwin publishes his work in a book called The Origin of Species by Means of Natural Selection. And again, he doesn't talk about the origin of life or anything like that. He just talks about the origin of species. How do we get all of these different types of species that we see today through the process of natural selection? It took him over 20 years to compile enough evidence before he published his work. And in his book, he explains for why we have all these different species and their distribution, so why they are found where they are in terms of observable natural processes.